Good evening, with an acknowledgement to Torah Anytime for their beautiful Mesiras Nefesh, for their outreach, which is Mekadesh Shem Shamayim Barabim, and we are very grateful to them for making available their facilities, their staff, to be able to reach everyone worldwide. This week's parsha is Parshas Vo'era. And Vo'era usually comes out either Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, or Rosh Chodesh takes place a few days before. This year, in our year, Rosh Chodesh is Wednesday night, Thursday. Shvat is always a one-day Rosh Chodesh. And the Bnei Yissaschar highlights two separate themes that Shvat stands for: the Shin, the Vez, and the Tes. One, he says, is Shomreim, that Klal Yisrael should be and is guarded. Baruchem, that we are gebenched. We are the one and only people on the face of the earth that HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at as his own children. And then the Tes stands for Taharim, because the difference between Yidden and Goyim is the Kedusha and the Tahara. The fact that there are geniuses amongst our people, you have some geniuses amongst the Goyim also. Yesh Chachma Bagoyim Tamin. But Kedusha and Tahara does not exist by them. And the second thing, and that's the Shin, the Vez, and the Tes, Shomim Baruchim Taharim. The second thing he says is Shmios Besuros Tovos, that we should hear only good tidings. Because as important as Shomrim, Baruchim, and Taharim, but the effectiveness of a Yid is at the level of his Simcha. Someone who is downcast, as the Arizal says, and is melancholy, it's hard to be able to, you can do mitzvahs, you can go through the day, but to get onto the other side of the greener grass spiritually, it must have the embodiment and the flavor and the platter, the silver platter of simcha on top of it. And that's why the Arizal says that even though Schar mitzvah b'hai alma leka, that there is, if you put everything in Olam Hazeh together, it could not pay the schar and the outstanding stature of reward for a mitzvah. But the Arizal says that's true, but the simcha shel mitzvah, yes, schar ba'olam hazeh, that a person for the simcha of his, because every person is burdened with difficulties. Some people it's children, some people it's parnasa, some people it's shidduchim, some people it's health. Everyone has their own list of tsaris, but if we can supersede that and rise above and beyond the occasion and enter into the realm of simcha, then we have the packaging and the embodiment of what is required to propel that mitzvah to the innermost sanctum of the highest levels of spirituality and of ruchnius. And both of these things we should see come to fruition in the month of Shvat. Now we know that Moshe Rabbeinu was nifter on Zayin Adar, but 36 days before Zayin Adar, the day of his Patira, he began to say Sefer Devarim. Vayehi ba'ashte osar chodesh be'echad la'chodesh diber Moshe el kol Yisrael. And that's the first pasuk in, the second pasuk in Devarim. And he then for 36 days said the whole Devarim, and on the 37th day, Zayin Adar, he was nifter. And Shvat carries in it the power, explains the Bnei Yissaschar, of Chamisha Asar B'Shvat. Now we know that we paskin, like Beis Hillel, that the Rosh Hashanah Le'ilanos, not the fruits is Shavuos, but a tree that is healthy and well, its proudest product are its fruits, and that's why on Chamisha Asar B'Shvat we take different fruits and make a shechianu. Now, the Arizal says that Teves and half of Shvat are down months, lacking in mazel. And that's why there were so many things that happened. And likewise, he says there's another Tekufa, all of Tammuz and half of Av, up until Chamisha Asar B'Av, that it's also down. And that's how we had in those 6 weeks to the Chorban of two Batei Migdash and all the trouble, the Egel, so much happened in Tammuz and half of Av. And likewise, in Teves and half of Shvat, it also lent itself to difficulties. We had the war with the Chashmonoim and the Greeks, the Avonim, and everything. But says the Arizal that when it comes to Shvat and to Av, when it hits the 15th day, it is mahapach, it completely is transformed. And that's why he says that we have 4 months following each of those tekufas. That right after Shvat, Chamisha Asar B'Shvat, we have in the next month, we have Purim. And then we are into Nisan with Pesach. And then into Iyar with Pesach Sheni, and then Sivan with Shavuos. And says the Bnei Yissaschar in the name of the Arizal, that the shoirish of all 4 of those Yomim Tovim stand from the power send-off of Chamisha Asar B'Shvat. Likewise, when we come into Chamisha Asar B'Av, which we'll talk more Be'ezus Hashem at that time, we were zoicha to an Elul for Klal Yisrael to prepare themselves for the new year. Rosh Hashanah, Aseret Yemei Tshuva, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. That we have all of that because of Chamisha Asar B'Av, and all the other 4 because of Chamisha Asar B'Shvat. But the interesting thing that differentiates between Shvat and Teves and Shvat and Tammuz and Av is that there's a machloikis in the Mishnah. When is the new year for the trees? The Rosh Hashanah Le'ilanos. So Beis Shammai holds it's Rosh Chodesh Shvat. Beis Hillel holds its Chamisha Asar B'Shvat. Now, till Mashiach comes, we paskin like Beis Hillel, for all practical purposes, Lemaisa, in the world of Maisa, of action, it's Chamisha Asar B'Av that propels us. But the fact is that since when Mashiach will come forever, we're going to follow the psak of Beis Shammai. So when he holds that Rosh Chodesh Shvat is the line of demarcation into the realm of good, so we don't practice it today because Mashiach is not here yet. But in its essence and its mahus, its DNA, it has the entire koyach of Shvat already inside of it. So even though we're not going to be making Shechianos this Rosh Chodesh, which is just in another day or two, but we know that in essence that the day itself is going to be forever the day celebrated, and therefore it has to have from the beginning, even before, all of its strengths, its fruition, and its ramification for everything that it possesses in the future. So we will have Rosh Chodesh Shvat this week, and we should be able, Haba Aleinu L'Toiva, to get out of the difficulties of Teves and to be able to celebrate the successes and the good tidings of Shvat. Now, the opening pasuk of this week's Sedra, and there are 7 of the 10 Makkos in this Sedra. Next week in Parshas Bo, there are 3. And the Mekubalim discuss that Chochmah, Bina, and Das are the last 3. And the first 7 are in Parshas Va'era, which is Chesed through Malchus. And we're not going to go into the ramifications and the dimensions of Chesed through Malchus, how each of those Makos match up to the Midah, like Dam to Chesed, Tzvardeya to Gevura. And so much so, but it has in it tremendous koiches, so much so that the Gemara says that Liyasid Lavo, the miracles of the Geula Shalema will be bigger than the miracles of Pesach, but still they could never have the Geula Shalema without the foundation and the source of what the Makkos of Pesach are. Now, the opening pasuk of our Sedra is Vayedaber Elokim El Moshe Vayomer Elov Ani Hashem. That Elokim we know as Midas Hazin, the severe Gevura. Chesed is everything is embraced, encompassed within the realm of goodness. And there is a vort from Kadmonim because the pasuk opens up Vayedaber Elokim with Midas Hadin, and then it concludes the very first pasuk. Vayom Ani Hashem. Hashem is Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's the largest and the biggest dose of chesed that could happen in the world above and in our world. So the Mefarshim ask, why do you have Elokim, which is din, and you end the pasuk Ani Hashem, which is diametrically opposed to what Elokim is? It's Kula Chesed. And they answer and say that when Rabbeinu HaKadosh used to say Shema Yisrael, he used to cover his eyes, and that's why we cover our eyes. And the reason he did it, the Mefarshim say, is because when he said Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu, which again is the Midas Hadin and the Midas HaChesed together, Hashem Echad, that it's all chesed, The only thing is we don't see it and we don't understand it. And that's why he covered his eyes. Because something that's covered you don't see openly. People live throughout the Golus with emunah and with bitachon. But many people, and we can't blame them because being tested is the toughest and most difficult thing. They had tremendous questions. Why was the Holocaust? Why this? Why that? Now, we know when the curtain on the stage will open and you will see behind the curtain, you'll understand all the reasons why everything that had to happen, and it was a chesed, which to us is like unbelievable. Chesed. If a 6-year-old child is killed by a car, that's chesed. But in the making and in the total picture of the world, you'll understand Hashem Echad, that it is all one thing. So Vayedaber Elokim, that yes, this looks like the last Sedra just ended off. That Moshe Rabbeinu said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that Umeyaz Basi El Paro, that from the moment I came to Paro, Heira La'amazeh, it became worse, bad for the Jews. So the pasuk ends and says, yes, Vayedaber Elokim, this story of Mitzrayim, there is a lot of suffering and din, but believe me, Ani Hashem, that when you will find out the reasons and know the background of everything, you'll see that it is Kula Chesed. Now, the next pasuk says, Va'era, and I appeared, El Avram, El Yitzchak, Vel Yaakov. And Rashi says, when it says Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, El Ha'avos. So everyone asks, Rashi has to tell us that Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are the Avos? Of course we know that it's the Avos. But the Chassam Sofer explains that the word Avos means two things. It means patriarchs, fathers, but it also means V'lo ova Hashem hashchisecha, wanting. That the Avos, Chaval al diavdin v'lo mishtakchen, that the Avos never questioned me, and they never used the word Heira, that something was bad, and they lived through great suffering and difficulties throughout their lives at different periods of time. But they never said, Heira. And Yaakov Avinu, who said that some of my years were bad, he paid for it with 33 years of his life, for every word of those psukim of that statement. So El Ha'avos means that there was a yearning, wanting, that the Avos, despite whatever they had to, whatever river of difficulty or sea of trouble, that they were able to rise above and to still increase in their desire to be connected to me and to do what I want them to do, regardless of what appeared to be some disappointment or some difficulty that they could have had a big question, but they didn't question it. So says the Chassam Sofer on the word avos, meaning wanting, desire, to yearn. Now, the pasuk says that if you look in the first 10 psukim, that the first 10 psukim, that Vayetzavim, Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe v'el Aaron lemar, Vayetzavim es b'nei Yisrael v'el Paro melech Mitzrayim, lahotzi es b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. So everyone asks, what's this Vayitzavim? What is the commandment? In other words, usually it says, Daber el b'nei Yisrael, this and that. Here it just says, Vayitzavim, and he commanded them to tell b'nei Yisrael, but it doesn't say one word, but the Yerushalmi, the Gemara Rosh Hashanah, the Yerushalmi says, Vayitzavim means that he talked to them to tell Bnei Yisrael about the mitzvah of Shiluach Avodim. That when you're going to come into Eretz Yisrael and you're going to have Avodim, but it's going to come the 7th year to send them out. So when the time comes, Yovel, to send out Avodim, you should do it with a simcha. So all of the Meforshim ask, why? They're in the middle of being beaten on. You're telling them, going back to Klal Yisrael, while they're being whipped and they're being hit and they're being beaten up. Oh, by the way, you're going to go out of Mitzrayim and you're going to have a mitzvah that when you have your own slaves, you're going to have to send them out. The guy was sitting there bleeding and you're talking to him about, oh, and he's going to have his butler and his chauffeur and his everything else, and that there's going to come a certain time to send them out. You're going to have a mitzvah to send them out because you had a lot of free help. A slave, I mean, today you have to pay a chauffeur $60,000 or $70,000, or a butler, or a maid, or whoever it is. But when it came, all this free help came to a halt. And it stopped, and you had to send them out. So the Meforshim explained that Dafke was said now. Because when you come to somebody and tell them that you're going to have some people coming to you who are very hungry, and the person you're telling it to just finished eating delicious Norwegian salmon and delicious chicken soup and brisket, and he got done and he sits back, he's so full, and you're talking to him about people are going to come to you that are so hungry that a delicious piece of bread is going to... He's so full that he can understand what you're saying. But to feel the midfield, the feeling is not there at the same level as if he himself had just fasted, like the Amshnov Rebbe, who this past Yom Kippur, and all the newspapers had it, fasted 3 days. He started the fast Sunday night, because Yom Kippur was Monday, and he broke the fast Wednesday night with Havdalah for the Tzibur. So when someone's in that state, you talk about hungry people, you can really appreciate it. Klal Yisrael now were being beaten on, and it was the time that they would have heightened sensitivity to the plight of someone who was going to become a slave in their house. So at that time, when they become a slave, you're very comfortable with having all the free help and having everything that you have from it. But when you were told about the mitzvah and it seeped into your bones, that when you were being, oh yeah, when I will have a slave, don't worry, I will be so good to that slave. I will give them fresh water and fresh food and make sure they have a comfortable pillow at night to be able, like the Gemara says, that person's mechuyev to do that. That a slave works for you all day, you have to make sure he eats well and that he sleeps well and that he has certain basic needs met, that he should be able to function and be at your service. So says Reb Chaim Shmulevitz that the reason that the Shaluach Avodim was said specifically at this time, not near when they were going to leave Mitzrayim, but right now, was because the heightened sensitivity had to be etched into their essence of their existence, that when the test of time would come and they would have their slaves, they would behave properly. Now, we know that it says twice the words vayar b'sivlosam. Now, the word sivlosam, you all know, means oppression. And the Chidushei Arim talks about these two sivlos, one spelled with a vav and one spelled without a vav. And he goes into that the one without the vav, with the vav, means the oppression and everything that they had to live through. And it broke two things. It broke their spirit, but the other sivlos means that it broke the level of hope. See, when a person gives up hope, that is already the worst. Because as long as there's hope, and there's a ray of light in front of their eyes with that hope, they are able to survive the day, no matter how bad it is. And when they throw up their hands and say, I am absolutely finished, and I cannot in any which way survive this, then they're in trouble. And that the Sipurna talks about. But the Chidushei Arim that I began to tell you, he says that when it talks about sivlos, the word sivlos is savlonos, that a person gets used to. That means the first day that you have to eat a crust of bread that's 5 days old, you can barely chew it and barely eat it. But when you do that for 20 years, and 30 years, and 50 years, like the Yidden in Mitzrayim were doing, you get used to it. You get accustomed. The same disgust does not exist as the first day, whenever you had to do whatever you were doing. Because there is in human nature the possibility to accustom oneself to even the worst of circumstances by the repetition from day to day. So the Chidushei Arim says that I will take them out of the savlonus, that they are soivel, that they're patient with it, because they've gotten so used to it. And that we have to change the mood and change the flavor of what's going on. And that can only happen when we immediately begin at the very beginning of a journey and we have resolve. Because the Gemara says that Shaul HaMelech had a daughter that was married to David. And Shaul never considered it a marriage. They lived together, but it was not a marriage. So he took that daughter after she was living for a while with David, and David considered her his wife. And Shaul gave him to Palti ben Laish. And he never, ever, and as a matter of fact, the Pasuk says, Rabos bonos asu choyol, that it means you made them very strong in their resolve. Zeh Yosef, the Medrash says, that pasuk, Rabos Bonos Osu Choil, goes on Yosef. But Vi'at Olis Al Kulona goes on this Palti ben Laish, even stronger, bigger than Yosef. Because when Shaul HaMelech put him with his daughter into one room, Palti ben Laish took a sword and he drove it into the ground, and he said that anyone who crosses over, meaning if he was to be intimate with that woman who Shaul did not, his daughter didn't consider her a Neshes Ish, Yidoker b'cherev, should be hit, should be punished with this cherev, should be killed. And he never, ever, all that time that he was with her, never crossed the line. Says Rav Chaim Shmuel Efetz, if he wouldn't have, as soon as he came into that tent, wouldn't have put the sword in and was decisive immediately that this is never going to happen, then he would have fallen in at some point. Well, let me see how things are, let me size up, People who survive test. The test comes with a fierceness, with a desire, with a burning feeling to do whatever they're tempted to do. But they can survive it with the determination and the decisiveness when it comes fiercely at the beginning. And that really shapes and develops so much of the achievement that we have in our lives, because there are moments of despair and disappointment that we could just throw our hands up and say, that's it, I'm not doing it, I'm not going to continue. Too much bickering, we took on to help this Kala and to throw a few parlor meetings and teas and everything else. But this woman, she wants to claim all the credit. That's when the ego and the personal glory sets in. But if a person takes on, well, I agreed to be part of this group and this committee, that this girl's going to get married with all the fanfare that a Kala deserves. And I'm not going to let anything get in the way of my thinking before the actual project comes to fruition, then it's going to happen. But if you don't go in with that resolve at the beginning, then the Yetzer Hara will be very happy to step forward with the thrust of ego-threatening events and comments to discourage the person. Now we know at the very beginning of the Sedra, right after what we just discussed, the Vayedaber Elokim and the Hashem, Sivlos Mitzrayim, all of this, we come to the Shiluach Avodim, and then we come to the genealogy. And you'll notice one difference that stands out. And that is that every tribe, every Shevet, it says B'nai Reuven, the names. B'nai Shimon, all the names. B'nai Gad, B'nai Zvulun, every name, it says B'nai, and then the name of the Shevet. One exception. Ve'ele Shemos B'nai Levi. It doesn't say B'nai Levi. It says Ve'ele Shemos B'nai Levi, and it doesn't say that by any other Shevet. And the Medrash explains that Levi was the one to be nifter last. From that whole generation of all the Shvatim, Levi was the last to die. He was 137 years old. So the Sipurna says that the reason that we stress Shemos B'nai Levi is because, as a matter of fact, Chazal say that the grandchildren of Levi ended up the frummest. Of all the other grandchildren of the other Shvatim, they were the most mahader in Torah and Halachah. And the Sipurna says, why did that happen? So he says, because Levi, the grandfather, lived the longest, that a child who was already 40 was still living with his grandfather, with Levi, because he wasn't nifter till he was 137. Others were nifter much before, but not Levi. And when you have the Shalshelis HaYuchsin, you have the genealogy, the grandparents to look at and to hear from, and to feel how their lives went, and to learn for how they grew up without even the cell phones and with the fax machines and with everything else. How rich and how deep into Torah and mitzvahs they were, that's passed on to grandchildren. So if someone was a grandchild and then his grandfather died when he was 4 years old, he really never learned that. But says the Sipurna, but the grandchildren of Levi were able to be afforded that luxury of learning because their grandfather lived so long, and they were able to be with them. But the Shalach HaKadosh says a different thing. That the reason by Levi it says Shemos B'nai Levi is because Levi was sitting in Goshen. They were not working. And they were learning, and they were in the Bais Medrash, but no working, no servitude. So says the Shalach HaKadosh, you would have thought that Levi and his children and the grandchildren, they felt bad for their cousins and their uncles, and that they were being beaten on and they were working so hard, but they were in their own world. They were not touched. So says the Shalach HaKadosh, Levi wanted that his children should never forget what their cousins were going through. So he named the kids Gershom, that we were throwing out of our land, Kahos, as the Medrash says, Shekihu Einehem, Shinehem, Shel Yisrael, that the Mitzrayim blackened the teeth, that their teeth went from white to black with all this servitude. And Merari, the bitterness of what they were swallowing and what they were doing and how they were living 12 hours of a day, each and every day. And by calling them these names, they were never, ever able to forget, not just to passively once in a while think, but every day they called them Merari. They were reminded of their brethren that were bitterly embittered by the Mitzrayim. And that says the Shalach HaKadosh, why it says, Ve'ele Shemos B'nai Levi. Now, at the end of our Sedra, we talk about the borod. Now, borod was hail, and we've all, at some point in our lives, seen pieces of hail. But this was miraculous hail because it was ice, but inside each chunk of, and there were the sizes of baseballs, was a flame, was a fire. Now, when you put fire next to ice, it melts the ice. So no one could say, well, it just happened to have hailed that day, it was no miracle. They couldn't say that because if there was fire in the ice, they saw openly it was a miracle. So interestingly, before the hail came down, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu to tell the Mitzrayim that you should know that there's going to be hail and anything outside is going to be killed. The slaves, the cattle, the sheep, everything outside. And inside, those who took their sheep and their cattle inside, no one died. No one was touched. So the Medrash says, who was a sample of Hayored Devar Hashem? Somebody who had a drop of sense in Yerushalayim. I mean, after all, they saw all the blood, all the water turn to blood. They saw all the frogs in their refrigerators and in their stoves and ovens, and they saw what was going on. And then in 1 second, they disappeared when Hashem wanted to. So they all saw miracles happening. So how could it be that they were warned? And the pasuk says that someone who had a drop of Yerushalayim and saw what was going on, he right away took all his stuff inside and nothing happened to any of it. But the people who did not, everything was killed outside. So the Medrash says the one who was Yorei Es Devar Hashem, that was Eov. And the one that didn't have any drop of Seichel in Yerushalayim and left everything outside, that was Bilam. So the Meforshim want to understand, like, how could this be? I mean, if today there was trouble in the street and there was an announcement, get out of the street, there's going to be 10 grenades going off in the next hour in the middle of the street. All the people that have half seichel would leave the street to get away from there. And which idiot would stay right there and lose everything? So the pasuk says, Asher lo sam libo, that he didn't give any attention to what was being said. You see, somebody could get on the train, and the train is traveling, and he has to get off his stop, and then 2 hours later, he realizes he's at the end of the train line. He never got off by the stop. He missed it because he didn't give any attention to where he was, and what his mission was on the train. His purpose was not to go to the end of the train track. It was to get off at a certain place. That there are people who go through life, they speak beautifully. Oh yes, there's nothing like the Torah. There's nothing like davening to Hashem. We're given a private audience with HaKadosh Baruch Hu every day, 3 times a day. And if we take out a Tillim or anything else, we're still talking right privately to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yet we're busy thinking about this and about my meeting tomorrow, and I have to show up for that. And I'm going shopping, and should I get dresses, green or blue, or should I get the pink and the pale and this is while they're davening or while they're doing the mitzvah? Because asher lo som libo, that a person has to condition himself for the time. There's nothing wrong thinking about what color dress you want to get when you're walking into the store or when you're coming close to the store. So you give it some thought because you're going there to get something that you want, l'kovet Shabbos, l'kovet Yom Tov, or for a chasna. So you have to pay a little attention. But at the important times, and there's the other guy who's standing on the track waiting to get on the train, and the train pulls up, the doors fly open, and then they close, the train pulls away, and the next train comes. Oh, now I have to get on the train. And again, the same thing happens. And the whole afternoon, he's standing there on the platform because he never got on the train. Asher lo som libo. That these were people that were so enmeshed in themselves or in something else that was not important, that when it came to all of their possessions, their avodim and their tzon and their bakar and their everything, it disappeared in a moment. Because asher lo som libo. Now, and that's why the Chazal say that when a person takes, that al yafsiu psiya gasa, that when a person takes a large step, the Gemara says, he loses 1/500th of his eyesight. And therefore a person shouldn't take a giant step, he should walk regular. And for the person that did take the giant step, he gets it back by Kiddush and Havdalah. Why Kiddush and Havdalah? Because the Meforshim say that we are very, usually a person who loses eyesight means he lost his perspective. Perspective is what everything's about. That means if you don't look at a pair of tefillin with the awe and the reverence that you should look at it, or take that lulav or esrog or the shofar, or that matzah, that one kezayas of matzah that you eat Pesach by night, and we'll talk by Pesach much more about it, but all of the amunah, the Zohar Kodesh says that the first night of Pesach, the matzah is mechlo demhemenusa. It's the matzah of emunah, that a person who's weak in their emunah, that the segula is to eat with a lot of kavanah, the matzah the first night of Pesach. The second night, the Zohar Kodesh says, is mechla diasvasa. It's a medicine. And that's why Rebbes, the Hasidim, used to take the crumbs from the matzah on the second night of Pesach, and they used to put it into wine after Pesach. They didn't do gebruks. They put it in, and when someone was a cholim mesukin, they gave him to drink from the wine that had the crumbs of the matzah, which was mechla diasvasa for the sick person. Like the famous story with the Balatanya, that there was a plague, and there were Hasidim that had lots of the matzah after Pesach put into the wine, and the Balatanya said that they should take all the sick people who were sick. It was 30 below zero, and they were so sick with 105 and 104 fever. And he said, bring them on their beds, carry them into the shul. And when they got into the shul, and the Misnagdim in the town were very upset with the Balatanya. You're a Rotseach, you take someone with 104 fever out into the 30 below zero. But they had Emunas Chachamim, they brought the sick people, they gave them to drink the wine that had the matzah, the mechlo diasvasa in it, and there was not one person that came to shul on a bed who was not healed during, and it was Simchas Torah, by the way. It was on Simchas Torah that this happened. Let's not forget that the Mishnah Berurah, the Chofetz Chaim, every second page of Mishnah Berurah quotes the Baal Hatanya. He calls him Harav Hagadol or Harav Shner Zalman. Different pages he calls him. But if the Chofetz Chaim, who was Kodesh Kadoshim with Ruach HaKodesh, didn't see that the Baal Hatanya was Kodesh Kadoshim, you think he'd be quoting him in the Mishnah Berurah? So we see the koyach of tzaddikim and their ability. Now, I want to tell you that in this parsha, there are 4 words that we say we have daled koises because of it. V'hotzeisi eschem, v'lokachti, v'hitzalti, v'go'alti. 4 words about a lashon of redemption, of geula, to be saved, to be taken out. So if I asked you how many kosas are there on Pesach, you would say there's 4. There's 4, but there's not 4. There's 5. Kosher lelio. And that's the 5th word, vehevesi. If I were to ask you how many kashas do we ask on Pesach, you would say 4. But there's not 4, there's 5, because the line manish tana halayla is before the 4 kashas. That's a 5th kasha. Because in the 4 worlds that we daven and we go through as we ascend, if we have a little kavanah of our davening, we're going from world to world, from the world of Asiyah to the world of Yetzirah to the world of Asiyah, Yetzirah, Atzilus is the 4th, and Bria, sorry. It's pretty late at night. It's almost 12 o'clock at night. I guess I could have a senior moment and not remember. But we go through, by davening, we begin at the beginning, and we go through Shemon Esrei, which is Atzilus. But there's one world that is higher, and it's called Keser. And all those 5s at the Seder correspond to that Keser. And it is marumas in the word vehevesi, which means after we have Mashiach and we come back to Eretz Yisrael, and there's Tchias HaMesim, that's the vehevesi. And interestingly, Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, paskins that at a Seder, we know the halacha is you are not allowed to be moisef kosos. That means we have 4 kosos. That means during Shulchan Aruch you can drink extra, whatever. But if between the 1st and 2nd kos somebody wants to take a kos and drink, he's not allowed to. So what does a chas and kala do at the Seder when they're at their Sheva brachos? They got married 3 days before Pesach, and they're still in the middle of their Sheva brachos, and you can't, on the benching, say the Sheva Brachos, because you can't do mitzvahs chavilas. You're not allowed to do on one becher two mitzvahs, two separate mitzvahs. That's why under a chuppah, we take for the Birchas Kedushin and Erusin one becher, then we put it on the side, and we take the second becher for the Sheva Brachos, for the Nesuin. Because you can't use the same becher, because that was one mitzvah, and this is a second mitzvah. So Rav Moshe Feinstein Paskin that the fifth becher, the fifth kos that you have on the table for a kos shel Eliyahu, that's what the Chosin Kala should, because it's already on the table. You're not being moisef koises, it's there already. And that is what we should use when we have Sheva Brachos on the nights of Pesach, the 2 nights of Pesach, from the Vehevesi of our Parsha, that is the Kos Shel Eliyahu, which represents the Doros and the Asidus of Klal Yisrael, and that's what a Shidduch really is, that it presents and provides Klal Yisrael with its Asidus. We hope that Klal Yisrael should go with all of these Lashonos of Geula. I'm sure there were many times that Klal Yisrael were having terrible redifas, so I can't say that Klal Yisrael never needed Mashiach more than now, because there were other times that, believe me, we needed it. But we certainly very much need it now, and we hope that the springboard of Geula will take from the shoirish of the words of the Parshas HaShavua, of the V'hotzesi, V'go'alti, V'hitzalti, V'lokachti, and then to the ultimate Vehevesi.